The film starts at a care home in the city of London in the middle of the night. The headmistress locks the door, but finds magazines on the floor in front of the door, distracting her, and she forgets to lock it. There's an orphan girl named Sophie who notices what happened, locks the door, and changes the clock to 3 a.m. She collects the mail from outside the door, turns off the lights, and says that she loves 3 a.m. because that's when magic happens, and it's the only time she's awake. Sophie places a mail in the headmistress's office, but she hears a sound from outside. She looks out the window and sees 4 drunk men making noise. Sophie becomes angry and tells them that there are children sleeping, threatening to call the police if they don't leave. She turns off the street lights, and the 4 men notice a huge shadow near the care home. Sophie thinks the men are scared of her threat. She heads to her sleeping area, gets in a bed, puts on her glasses, and uses a flashlight to read her book. The headmistress walks in, and Sophie pretends to be asleep, turning off the flashlight. Once the headmistress leaves, Sophie continues reading. She then hears a sound coming from outside the care home and goes to the window, repeating the headmistress's instructions to herself, that they must never leave their bed at night, never go to the window, and never look beyond the curtains. Sophie disobeys these instructions and finds that the noise is coming from some cats in the street. Suddenly, a giant hand appears and lifts a trash bin from the street. The owner of the hand, a giant, comes into view and looks at Sophie, annoyed that she saw him. Terrified, Sophie quickly returns to her bed, but the giant grabs her, carrying her away. The giant runs with Sophie through the city of London, skillfully hiding himself, blending in as a wall or pretending to be something carried on a vehicle. The giant leaves the city, taking giant strides as he moves through fields, crosses the sea, and flies through the sky between the clouds. He finally reaches the cave where he lives and hangs Sophie on a tree branch inside his home. He begins cutting a giant vegetable that looks like a cucumber. Meanwhile, Sophie tries to escape. She climbs out of the blanket and walks along the tree branches, finding a window. She tries to open it, but in doing so, knocks some things over. The giant notices and approaches her. He speaks to her, telling her that she won't be able to escape unless she has wings to fly. He closes the window, and Sophie falls into the pan he is using to cook. The giant takes the pan to the table and continues cutting the vegetables. Sophie asks him where they are, and he tells her that they are in giant country. Suddenly, Sophie hears the sound of giant footsteps and is terrified. The giant looks out the window and sees his fellow giants. Sophie, frightened, asks him to promise that he won't eat her. The giant laughs and tells her that he doesn't eat humans. Sophie explains that he kidnapped her and that she is an orphan living in an orphanage where the children hate her. The rules are strict and life is unhappy. The giant despises the headmistress for being so strict with orphans and gives Sophie her glasses. Sophie then asks if the other giants are as kind as he is. As the giant eats, he tells her that the other giants eat humans and bully him because he doesn't. Sophie, curious, asks why he kidnapped her if he wasn't going to eat her. The giant explains that it's so she won't reveal his secret, as people might capture him and put him in a cage like an animal. Sophie insists she won't tell anyone and begs to be taken back to the orphanage, but the giant decides she will stay with him for the rest of her life. He throws a blanket over Sophie because she talks too much, and she tells him that she'll escape no matter what. The giant warns her that if she does, the other giants will eat her. Sophie watches as the giant prepares his bag and holds a jar that emits light. He explains that the jar contains dreams. Sophie tells him that she doesn't dream when she sleeps because she has insomnia. The giant reads from her book until she falls asleep. After the giant made sure that Sophie was asleep, he went to the cave and pulled a lever that controlled a door hidden behind the waterfall. This door led to his secret laboratory, which was filled with jars containing dreams. He mixed them together to create a nightmare for Sophie. Hours later, Sophie woke up and saw the giant sleeping on his boat, so she decided to escape on her own into a strange area. Suddenly, another giant appeared and grabbed her. Sophie saw the kind giant closing the door to his home, looking at her sadly, and then the other giant ate Sophie. Sophie woke up from the nightmare, which the giant had created in his laboratory. He lifted her up and placed her on the table so she could eat with him. Sophie noticed a bottle with a fizzy liquid inside, where the bubbles went down instead of up. The giant told her it was an unusual drink, and when he drank it, it made him pass gas, which caused him to fly around. Suddenly, the leader of the giants entered. demanding that the kind giant treat a wound he had. The leader spoke like a child. Sophie hid as she watched the kind giant tell the leader that he would treat him later, but the leader got angry, insisting he be treated immediately. The kind giant prepared a bowl of water, knowing that the leader was afraid of water. He then grabbed some cloth and tended to the wound. The leader then smelled the scent of a human and asked the kind giant if he had captured one. The kind giant lied and said no, hiding Sophie inside a vegetable. The leader searched everywhere for the human, saying he was hungry. The kind giant handed him a piece of the vegetable to eat, not realizing Sophie was inside it. As the leader was about to eat, the kind giant noticed Sophie's legs sticking out from the vegetable. He reminded the leader how much he hated vegetables to prevent him from eating Sophie. The leader threw the vegetable on the ground and took the bottle of the magical drink. The leader told the kind giant that he was a disgrace to the giants and then left. The giant placed Sophie on the table, and she crawled out of the vegetable, all dirty. The giant took her to the laboratory, turned on the water, and cleaned her while she was on the palm of his hand. Afterward, he moved her near the fire to dry. He then brought out a box filled with human clothes, and Sophie changed into new clothes. The giant put Sophie's belongings in a hollow of a tree, making it look like a small room for her to sleep in. Once Sophie finished changing, the giant lifted her and placed her in her little room. He went off to work, and Sophie asked him what kind of work he did, promising she wouldn't tell anyone. The giant explained that he catches dreams, but Sophie didn't understand what he meant. She begged him to let her come with him to work, and the giant agreed, but only for once. Sophie sat on the giant's shoulder as they left the cave. She saw the other giants sleeping, and they moved slowly to avoid waking them. However, the leader of the giants woke up, grabbed the kind giant by his leg, and Sophie fell to the ground. She quickly hid inside a car. The leader started playing with the kind giant like a toy along with the other giants. The giants grabbed the kind giant and placed him on top of a car, then pushed the car down a slope. Another giant brought 2 more cars, one of which had Sophie inside. The giants tied the cars together like a pair of skates and sent them down the slope. Sophie noticed that she was about to crash into the kind giant, so she tried to change the car's direction, causing the giant to fall. The other giants were having fun, but then it started to rain, and the giants became scared of the water. The kind giant quickly picked up Sophie, and they escaped. However, the leader found Sophie's blanket and realized that the kind giant was hiding a human with him. The kind giant walks with Sophie and takes her to a place above the clouds, reaching the land of dreams. He tells Sophie that he can hear the sounds of stars, trees, and animals. He sets Sophie down on the ground, and she looks at a lake that reflects the image of a giant tree, which begins to glow in the reflection. The giant tells Sophie that he used to be as big as the other giants, but when he entered the lake, his size shrank. The giant and Sophie descend into the lake, which acts as a magical portal to the world of dreams. The giant begins collecting dreams, but there's one strange dream that flies quickly, making it difficult for him to catch. The dream flies towards Sophie, but the giant manages to capture it and places it in a jar, where Sophie's image appears inside. The giant encourages Sophie to catch some dreams, and she successfully grabs one that glows red. However, the giant quickly takes it from her, explaining that it's a nightmare. Suddenly, the giant disappears, and Sophie anxiously calls out for him. He reappears on the other side of the lake and lifts Sophie up. They continue together, and Sophie decides to name the kind giant BFG. They go to the city of London, and the giant brings his magical dream trumpet, blowing dreams into the minds of sleeping children. He tells Sophie that he is as old as the earth itself, that he existed before humans, and that he can hear the hearts of children, including Sophie's heart. After he finishes, they leave the city. On their way, they hide from the other giants, who are eating humans. The giant asks Sophie about her blanket, and she tells him it fell in giant country, which makes him worried. Later, Sophie wakes up and finds herself in front of the orphanage. The giant tells her that he is afraid for her because of the other giants, but Sophie doesn't want to leave him. The giant then tells her a story about a boy who lived with him, just like Sophie, but the giants ate him. The giant leaves on his own, but Sophie remembers that he can hear her heart. She leaps from the balcony, certain that the giant will catch her, and he does. He promises never to leave her, and they go off together. He takes her back home, but the leader of the giants sees them. The kind giant is in his laboratory, thinking of a plan to stop the other giants from eating Sophie. Suddenly, the leader and the other giants enter the laboratory and destroy it. Sophie hides in her little room, but when the leader smells her scent, she runs and finds another hidden space in the tree. She realizes it was the room of the boy who used to live with the giant. When the leader spots her, the kind giant decides to be brave and confronts the other giants. He brings out a pot of water to scare them off. While watching, Sophie looks at a picture of the queen, and an idea comes to her. She comes out once the giants have left and tells the kind giant that she will ask the queen for help. She tells him that they need to create a nightmare for the queen. The giant goes to prepare the nightmare and puts it in a jar. Their plan is to make the queen dream about what is happening. The kind giant is nervous, but Sophie convinces him to trust the plan. They sneak to the queen's palace, avoiding the guards, and reach the window of the queen's room. The giant uses his magical trumpet to blow the dream into the queen's mind. When the queen wakes up from the dream, she is terrified and tells her maid about what she saw. She opens the newspaper and reads about the recent disappearance of children, realizing that what she dreamt is true. Sophie appears, and the queen recognizes her from the dream. Sophie tells him about the kind giant and asks that no one harm him. The queen agrees. Sophie calls for the giant, and he appears in front of the queen and her guards. The guards surround him, but the queen orders them to let him go. The giant approaches the queen, bows to her as a sign of respect, and says that he is here to help. The queen agrees to the plan. She then calls the head of the army, while Sophie is dressed in beautiful clothes, and they all have breakfast together in the palace. The giant enters the palace, and they prepared a special table just for him. He enjoys human food very much, but he doesn't like the coffee and spits it out onto the servants. Then, he pulls out his magical drink and offers it to the queen. The head of the army arrives, and the queen orders them to defeat the evil giants. The giant shows them the way to giant country. They drink the magical drink and release gas that makes them fly. The queen tells them to start the plan. The giant and Sophie return to the lab and create nightmares for the giants. They go to the giants while they are sleeping. The kind giant tells Sophie that her dream is to have a family, but she won't achieve that if she stays in the orphanage. He reassures her not to worry because he will always be there when she needs him. The giant forgets to bring the magic trumpet, so Sophie uses her small size to release the nightmares. But the leader of the giants wakes up and sees her. Sophie breaks the jar, releasing the nightmares into the minds of the giants. The leader grabs the nightmare and destroys it. He tries to capture Sophie, but the kind giant defends her. The leader lifts the giant and tries to kill him. But then the army helicopters arrive and capture all the giants. The helicopters fly off, carrying the giants and drop them on a distant, isolated island. They give them giant vegetable seeds to grow and eat. Sophie goes to live in the queen's palace. She wakes up after dreaming of the kind giant, happy and alone in giant country, eating human food. She goes to the window and talks to him, confident that he can hear her. In reality, the giant is listening to her from giant country, and he is happy. This is where the movie ends. Goodbye.